I want to discuss a pole shift. And when I mean pole shift, I don't mean the traditional idea of the planet shifting and the land shifting and all that kind of fun stuff. I mean more so the idea that things in manifestation are a duality. And there is a polarity, positive and negative, male, female. And for quite a long time on our planet and throughout human endeavor, much emphasis has gradually been laid on a male-focused, dominated, and largely aggressive tendency. It's been carried forward for quite some time, and it's very, very dominant in this day and age. And certainly we can consider all of the wars that are going on, all of the aggressive territorial attitudes that different leaders have, and captains of industry that are seeking to gain. And so they aggressively seek to attain for themselves. And I consider this a very negative and a very antiquated way of doing things, of considering things. And for so much energy to be focused on these kind of aggressive endeavors, and this aggressive male energy is a very big hindrance to many things taking place within humanity and with the planet itself, with the consciousness that indwells the globe as well, that will allow for some further unfolding of consciousness and a more cooperative endeavor. And so with that aspect in mind, that the consciousness of our globe is vital, is active, and is in tune with humanity, as some of humanity are also in tune with the consciousness of the planet. Unfortunately, those that seek to, again, aggressively seek and gain territory, and again, try to aggressively attain and gain at the expense of others, is definitely a hindrance to, again, a lot of cooperative work that could be taking place, and also within the consciousness of our globe. It hinders some expansions of expansions of consciousness that could be more steadily taking place, and the quality with which these changes can take place in the consciousness of the globe could be smoothed over a bit, and the transition to, again, further unfoldings of consciousness could take place with much more ease. Considering that we as humanity have a relation to the consciousness of the globe in the sense that we are like brain cells in the brain of the planet. And so, considering our own brain, the idea, we're aware, or some are aware, I should say, that we don't use the entire brain. We use only a very small portion of it. And so we, as humanity, are akin to the idea of the brain cells, and some being active and many, many, many being latent and unaware of larger energies working out and things of that nature. And so, again, that analogy holds accurate, that we as humanity can activate ourselves individually, and so we can form a greater brain trust and a more thoughtful condition on the globe. And this is a matter of setting our intent to do so. Again, when so much energy and effort is being spent on, again, aggressive territorial moves, and all of the support that takes, all of the troop energy, all of the logistic support, all of the money that has to be generated, loans, interest on the loans, and how the banking aspect, profits from all this kind of aggressiveness. This all ties into the current situation that's been gradually unfolding for quite some time on the planet. And I think it would be interesting to kind of consider moving forward from when we first became self-conscious as humanity, to take that somewhat, take it to the future. I'm not going to be able to, lay out all the way from that time forward, obviously, within the short amount of time I have, and there are so many examples that I could fall back on. So I'm just going to try to touch upon a few different examples to try to bring some consideration to the idea that a pole shift is really, we're in dire need of a pole shift in the sense that we're in dire need of our energies, of the planetary energies and the energies that humanity expends really would benefit, it would be much more beneficial all the way around if we could encompass these ideas of a more balanced way of thinking and a more balanced way of doing things. And so a pole shift, I think, is right and proper in the sense that we need to shift away from the aggressive male-dominated polar tendencies to the more negative, passive female kind of energies. And that doesn't mean passive in the sense of just, you know, laying back and not concerned about things. More, there can be an activeness in the passivity as well, but nonetheless, the condition of that the female component of humanity makes up, it has been kind of relegated, or definitely relegated, to a backseat in many respects. And so I think it's very proper that more consideration is laid on how we can bring that energy further to the female so that there's more of a balance existing. And that's the whole idea with any kind of endeavor, esoteric endeavor, or any kind of self-discipline. There is a seeking for some sort of a balance. And so we can consider, if we trace back our roots to when we first became self-conscious as a race, as humanity first became self-conscious, and the mind nature first became potent within humanity. And this can relate biblically to the Garden of Eden experience. And esoterically speaking, man was considered far back into antiquity to have both sexes contained in one vehicle. And so there wasn't the division at that point, male and female. So early man was androgynous. He had the capacity to, man had the capacity to allow a birthing process to take place without procreation. And so this gradual material plane condition resulted where we moved from a much more, as an androgynous man, we're much more close to a spiritual origin, our spiritual origins. And so as we moved down into denser matter, as we evolved in that, along those lines, then we gradually split into two distinct sexes. And so then the normal means of creation came into being to allow for new life to be born and these new conditions and evolution to carry forward. And so again, we gradually moved into a condition where there was man and woman. And there are early examples, again, going back to the Garden of Eden experience, that I consider a symbolic story, that the first woman, Eve, was sometimes considered, let's see, forgive me because I've been off 2 weeks. I'm having trouble getting my flow going for some reason. But at any rate, the Eve symbolized the snake, or evil in some respects. And also it symbolizes matter. And matter, if we consider the word matter or mater, M-A-T-E-R, it's a Latin root for mother. And so the matter condition, or the mother condition, the female or negative condition of our humanity, is what's represented by the Eve condition of humanity. And I don't subscribe to the idea that there was one man, Adam, and one woman, Eve, and they had children, and then from there, all of humanity sprang forward. I tend to think of the Adam as the archetypal first race of men, and Eve as the archetypal, first women that came into manifestation. And so the idea of Adam and Eve certainly is pretty well known, and there's also some symbolism in mythology relating to Lilith, who was an earlier wife of Adam, and according to the symbolism in the myth of Lilith, she didn't bring forth any children. She only brought forth like demons and vile kind of things from that union. And so this I could definitely consider to be a symbolic consideration of the positive and the negative aspect, and that from that the procreation process takes place and the creation process takes place. And so there are a lot of symbols that are tied into the female energy that relate to how this has moved forward throughout time. And a couple of the symbols that are that relate to the female aspect, a couple of names, Isis and Sophia, Isis being the Egyptian version and Sophia being the Greek version, and those two cultures being closely related around 2,000 years ago, that these two female symbols symbolized wisdom, or they symbolized the mystery tradition, so-called, and that there are other women that, there are actual women as well that were definitely involved with the early traditions, early spiritual traditions, and even considering the idea of an oracle. There was an oracle at Delphi, which is in Greece, and in ancient times there would be a woman that would be the conduit. There would be what was termed an unfed flame, and there would be this, again, this oracle that was some means of tapping into divine consciousness. And so by means of this oracle, a woman would read from this oracle or interpret from the oracle what was to come to pass in terms of prophecy and things of that nature. And so more esoteric information was made available through this means. And there are a lot of other symbols that we can look back to as well from antiquity that find themselves repeating in a lot of different religious traditions that, again, we see repeating. And one of those is the ark. And certainly many are familiar with the idea of Noah and the ark, and that certain animals were chosen. Well, supposedly one of all the animals, or excuse me, two of all the animals rather, were put aside and saved after the great flood so that the life can start over again. And the ark has been a symbol in a lot of other traditions as well. And so there have been ark stories in a lot of other religious writings and different cults and things of that nature. But the ark has always been considered a symbol of regeneration, or that it's a vessel for creation. And anytime we think of something that's shaped like that, that's like a cup or something that has some kind of a hollowed out space, like the ark would supposedly apparently have, this again ties back to the more female aspect, and even tying into the Grail, the Holy Grail. The cup is also a recessed area, and so there can be some correspondence between that and a womb. Also, a cave or a tomb or an inner space in the ground has always been related to the womb and rebirth. And so going underneath into this dark space, into this dark contained area, that these inner processes would take place and something would be revealed or regenerated from these symbols in many myths throughout time. Getting back to the Grail, some may be familiar with the idea, the premise for the book, The Da Vinci Codes, that lays out the idea that perhaps Jesus the man may have had children, he may have had a daughter, and so this feminine progeny was obviously revered by those that, if indeed this is true, or even if it's just a myth, there are many people that believe this to be true, and there are many that live their lives believing this to be so. And so there were those that became convinced that there was this female aspect relating to Jesus, and that this was kept secret, and it was always protected from the time of Jesus to current times. And so this is another aspect of the Grail to consider, because there are many different meanings behind the Grail, and some ideas are that it is the cup from the Last Supper that Jesus and the disciples drank from, and so it was a symbol of the Last Supper and a symbol of the sacrificial meal and things of that nature. But I tend to think that it does have more of the female, again, the womb type symbolism, that seems to have some significance, and just my intuitive feeling is that that might be more so the real deal on that. And if not, at least there's definite evidence that a lot of throughout history rather, for about the past 2,000 years, that many individuals have sought to keep that idea perpetuated at some level and protect this bloodline at some level. And so that's another concept to consider as well. Let's see, where else do I want to go with this? Okay, I do want to speak also, and I'm only going to be able to give a few examples because they're just way too many. But the basic premise that I'm kind of trying to get to here is that throughout time, the female element has been with us from the very inception of our self-conscious creation, when the mind nature became potent in man. And so that this female aspect has gradually been with man, and it's been relegated to different positions at different times. And so there are always going to be cycles and seasons in which the more male aspect, the more dominant, aggressive aspect would be more predominant, and then other cycles wherein the female or the more negative aspect would be emphasized. And so that's also why I'm bringing this subject to light today, is because I feel that there is a definite transition point in which a pole shift in those terms, in the terms of shifting from a polarity of positive and aggressive to the negative, is in a point of transition, and that we are moving into that more feminine component, and we will have the capacity and the potential to derive that energy. It also ties in somewhat to the idea of the Aquarian impulse coming in, that we spent about 2,000 years roughly within each zodiacal sign, and so upcoming is the Aquarian sign, and that also ties in with flowing of water, and certainly you can think of other flowing terminology and symbolic comparisons to the female aspect, and I think that has some significance that should be considered as well. And so this natural outpouring, this natural cooperation, and this natural synthesis will become more prevalent, and so this will again lend to a shifting of energies in which I feel there will be much more cooperation and much more exchange, as opposed to competition, territorialism, and aggressiveness that is so predominant in our society today. And so throughout time, again, women have been relegated to various positions, but I think that it's been very well veiled, or not very well considered, that, and outright hidden in some respects, that women did have a much more dominant role in certain segments of our society in ancient times. And so these different women in different traditions, again, held relatively high positions, and they did much to help bring forth different aspects of our human nature and different areas of endeavor for humanity, that they helped spearhead in many respects a lot of these unfoldings. And so one individual I wanted to speak about briefly is a woman that lived some time back. Actually, she lived from 370 AD to 415 AD, where she met a quite untimely demise. But I'm speaking of a historical figure, an actual historical figure, a woman named Hypatia, and she was part of a group that was known as Philalethean, which means lover of truth. And I think that's something that that's a definite goal worth striving for and attaining, is truth. Those that seek truth and those that love truth are termed Philalethean. And so Hypatia, being part of that philosophy, she taught the secret doctrine. She taught esoteric science. She basically she was the daughter of a mathematician, and she herself was also a mathematician. She practiced theurgy, which is another word for magic, and she was also a Neoplatonist, which, if some are familiar with Plato and his writings, and also the idea that he had a school, the Platonic schools, and that a later rendition came into being after the fact, and this was known as Neoplatonist or Neoplatonic philosophy. And so Hypatia was a proponent of these ideas, and she was very proficient in dispelling the myths of religious mysteries. And so she, as a kind of teacher, instructor, and also a magician in her own right, was able to take students in, and again had a definite knack with being able to relay these deep and profound mysteries that were tied up in myth and symbol, and relay them to her students and other individuals. She herself studied under Plutarch, who some may recognize that name, who was a head of an Athenian school. And so she and her teachings and her way were at some point in time considered very, very detrimental to the embryonic Christian church that was coming into being. And so there became those that were, on the one hand, quite jealous of her ability because she was considered a great orator. She was considered to be very, very wise and very well spoken and very knowledgeable. And so, again, there became a lot of jealousy about that, and also the idea that these competing remnants from the so-called mystery tradition were still relevant and viable at the time when the Greek and the Roman and the Egyptian cultures were kind of intermingling, but the Roman culture was the predominant culture, and this was spearheading this bringing in of Christianity. Again, another aggressive tendency that, again, cyclically was right and proper. And this is part of also another cycle in which the esoteric tradition, again symbolized by female elements, whether that be Isis, the Egyptian symbol, or Sophia the Greek, that this wisdom tradition was very much in competition with this upcoming Christianity, and in order to maintain power, in order to bring some interest and to bring more adherence to this upcoming Christianity, the existing schools and the existing philosophical centers had to be shut down. And so this is what happened in this particular instance. And there were a couple of individuals that that are directly tied to this. Theophilus and his nephew Cyril. They basically had Hypatia beaten to a pulp. They had another person, they put another person up to it, and this other individual basically beat her to a pulp. And past that point, they even scraped the skin from Hypatia's bones from her corpse with oyster shells, and then she was further burned so this is the kind of attitude they had towards her, and the level that they felt they need to go to defile her body, to make a point and to get rid of her, and I guess also make an example to other individuals. It's quite interesting, though, that Cyril was later canonized as a saint, and he's also relatively well known for going on trial for having stolen some articles from the church, some silver and gold items that he just dismissed the charges because he claimed that he did take these things, but he sold them and gave the money to the poor. And there wasn't really much evidence that he actually did end up giving the money to the poor, and so he's pretty much considered a thief and a liar and a saint. So such is the Church of Rome, and such is, you know, what they emphasize. Again, aggressive tendencies in which this tradition, this esoteric tradition, was subjugated and relegated to a lesser place and had to very much go underground. So anyone that was considered a Gnostic, Neoplatonic in their philosophy, or the so-called pagan mystery traditions, anyone that still held on to these belief systems had to really watch their back and had to really be careful. And again, many of the main adherents and proponents to these philosophies were female. And so this is, again, something to consider, that you know, we tend to think of women from the Victorian times, that they've always been subjugated or relegated to, you know, the kitchen, and they've had to clean and cook and just raise children, and that would be their lot in life. But this is not really accurate to history. If we really delve in and study either the writings from these early philosophers and the traditions that they belong to, or any real delving into comparative religion and just an accurate, or not necessarily, well, accurate certainly, but an intense study into history should reveal to anyone that's earnest in their seeking that women were very much more dominant and prominent in many respects in their roles in the past. And I do see, again, a pole shift, so-called, if you will allow that term, in which this feminine energy is going to revisit, and this will be much more emphasized and will be the more dominating energy, and so much more of a balance can be struck. And by virtue of being balanced in that respect, much more constructive energies and efforts can be maintained. And let's see, I also want to mention, in relation to some of the women that were supposedly affiliated with Jesus and the early church, there's an individual named Edgar Cayce who is called the Sleeping Prophet. And granted, he divined this information by basically going to sleep and being in a sort of a trance condition, in which he was able to ascertain a reasonably high level of delving into unseen aspects, and so by virtue of that, he's able to tap into past and kind of read accurately, as if he was reading from a book or watching a movie of these goings on from the past. And so, again, that's obviously should be taken with some speculation as to whether or not this individual was actually able to pull this off and be accurate in what he was able to recount in his sleep state or this trance state. But nonetheless, I personally feel that Edgar Cayce has some valid information to bring out, and that it is, I feel, reasonably accurate. And also, if any comparison is made to what's been available through the esoteric tradition and various writings that have been available for some time, one can see correspondences that what Cayce spoke of tends to fall in line and sync up with what esoteric tradition claims to be factual and actual as well. And one thing along those lines is that Jesus belonged to a group called the Essenes. And esoteric tradition generally agrees that Jesus was a member of the Essenes, or a member of a group that was almost identical in their beliefs, like the Nazarenes, the Therapeutae, Ebionites. There are a handful of other sects, so-called, that were more Christian in some respects, but also were not the official Christendom that was coming into being, that was being emphasized by the Roman Church. And so it was not well received, and it was, again, a lot of energy and effort was being expended to shut down all of these little threads that have been existing through antiquity, that contained ideas and symbolism that was very much in line with Christianity and identical in many instances as well. And so many were, and there was a point when the Gnostics and the Neoplatonic groups were starting to gain favor because, again, they were generally quite well spoken. They had their game together, if you will, and so they were able to bring people into a rapport with their philosophy and with their ideas. And so as they were continued to draw interest to these concepts, they stirred up a lot of trouble, not intentionally, but they by virtue of the circumstances and the prevailing climate, this came down on them. So by no fault of theirs, really, it's just a cyclic unfolding that takes place in which the female energy that was encompassed through the mystery traditions was relegated or had to take a backseat to a more male-dominated consideration of a spiritual tradition, and that it was began to be emphasized along those terms, and that again, the ideas that sprang up through the early Hebrew tradition and what became known through the Old Testament really demonstrated an angry father archetypal God that was, a jealous God that was always punishing any of those that didn't follow and didn't believe and didn't, do his bidding. And so that became the dominant idea of God and of spirituality. And so that's, again, that is pretty much what we consider when we think back. But in actuality, if we consider more information, it would be difficult for us not to consider the other women that were playing a prominent role during these times. And so there were many women that were associated with the coming forth of Jesus. And today being January 6th, this is the day that Edgar Cayce assigns for the birth of Jesus. Today, again, being the Epiphany. Epiphany meaning an appearance, to show forth or manifest. And also, according to Cayce, the word is seen means expectancy. And so this very much ties in as well with Epiphany and the word is seen, meaning, expectancy. So they were expecting, these Essenes were in expectancy, in a state of expectancy of this appearance, of this showing forth, of this manifestation of Jesus, who would later bear Christ in his nature and become Christ through his endeavors. And so there were many women, according to Cayce, that were affiliated with this early endeavor. And the leader of the Essenes during the time of the birth of Jesus was a woman named Judy. There was also another woman, also Cayce speaks about a lot of the different philosophers and magi and different proponents of these different philosophies and mystery traditions from different areas, Asia Minor, the Middle East, and all around the area of the Palestine and what we consider the biblical territory, that there were other individuals that were very cognizant of the idea that there would be a Savior coming forth. And so many of these individuals would send emissaries or go themselves to, again, in the state of expectancy, seek to set things up so that this could play itself out in the right and proper fashion. And there was another woman, supposedly from another group, that had a similar philosophy that was also interested in doing work to help facilitate this bringing forth of the Savior. And her name was Zermata. And so she worked and she and Judy would counsel and would consider, obviously which methods and how to approach the situation. And so that's a definite consideration. There was also a woman named Sophia who was supposedly the nursemaid to John the Baptist when he was young. And most are probably familiar with the idea that when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, there was no room at the inn. According to Edgar Cayce, the innkeeper was actually sympathetic to the Essenes and to their cause, and he was also familiar with the idea that Jesus was going to be born. But rather than put extra scrutiny on Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, the upcoming Jesus birth, that they, just said no room at the inn, and so not so much attention would be drawn to this event. And the innkeeper, whose name I didn't bother to make note of, had a daughter named Saratha, and she also was very much in line with the philosophy that Mary was about to have a baby who would become the Savior for all humanity. And so she also did what she could after her duties were done to make her way to the cave in which the manger was built, so that she could help as well with this coming forward. And so that's one more consideration of another woman from the biblical times that had much of an influence in these events and played a significant role, according, again, in this case, to Edgar Cayce. Again, considering that he did gain his information by going to a kind of a trance state, that that might be best taken with a grain of salt. But nonetheless, to me, my intuitive feeling is that this does ring true. And when I reread this story of, or a particular book that I have that compiles a lot of these readings that Edgar Cayce did relating to this event, that it does just intuitively strike me as accurate. And so I can't say that everyone would agree with me necessarily, but I would say that if you have an interest in these type of ideas, that it might be something that would be worthy of your consideration to look into a bit and see what you think about it on your own. See if you can reconcile your beliefs with some of these esoteric concepts, or if it's completely foreign, then perhaps not. Also, I want to bring up the idea that some of the Bible books were written by women, and that I don't think is very much emphasized so much in the mainstream, or in mainstream theology, or within the different churches in this day and age either. But some of the biblical books that were written by women, Ruth, Esther, and then there are also some apocryphal books that were written as well, Judith and Susanna, and those aren't readily available in a King James Bible. But if you have a Catholic Bible, which I was raised Catholic, and so I have a Catholic Bible that I've had for a number of years, and this has these apocryphal writings in it, Judith and Susanna, and a handful of others, not other females, but other apocryphal writings that are added in that complement, in my estimation, the gospel narratives and some other writings in the Bible. But they're just not very well emphasized for whatever reason. Let's see here. So again, there's definitely been throughout time and women have played varying roles throughout time, and some more high profile and some more desirable than others. Some of the relatively recent examples I would like to bring up as well would be with around the turn of the century, around the late 1800s, a lot of the mystery tradition information and a lot of so-called secret societies and esoteric orders sprang up. And more often than not, there were women either heading these organizations or involved in some key place within this bringing forward of these different schools and these different writings that were brought forward that were a continuation or a revisitation of what was previously touched upon in these old mystery schools and these old philosophical circles. And so many of the women that we can consider, one in particular I would point to would be Helena Blavatsky, who was a Russian woman who started what became known as the Theosophical Society, which is still in existence today. And she was a very, some almost considered her to be like a man in her attitude, that she was kind of rough, a little rough around the edges, so to speak. But she was a very dominant figure, and she, I think, very much needed that type of personality in order to bring forth this kind of information and for it to gain a foothold in this in a more modern setting. And so she was part of that movement and brought that information forward. And not to mention other members, other women that were prominent within the Theosophical Society. Annie Besant was another woman that she became the head of the Theosophical Society after Blavatsky passed away. And she was involved with a lot of different humanitarian efforts. One thing in particular that she was relatively well known for was encouraging India home rule. This is around the time that India had been conquered by Britain, and she was very much in favor of having the Indians, the Asian Indians, not American Indians obviously, rule for themselves and to be arbiters of their own destiny and not be subjugated by this imperial, again, aggressive male tendency that sought to dominate and conquer, that was so prevalent. But again, we could see the little cracks starting to appear at that time. And so, again, Annie Besant was very, very prominent in that India home rule and other endeavors as well in order to bring around social reform. A lot of these women were involved in rights of workers, labor rights, things of that nature. And so they were seeking a level playing field, and certainly if we flash forward to the 1920s, you've got the women's suffrage movement, women trying to acquire the vote in the States. And that, again, is another example of how the tide tends to turn and how this energy or this emphasis tends to switch from a more male-dominated to a more feminine conditioned energy. And so I really firmly feel that this is going to be much more prevalent as time continues to allow it to manifest itself. Another woman that came from the Theosophical Society that was quite prominent was a woman named Alice A. Bailey, and she left the Theosophical Society and started her own organization, which is known as Lucis Trust. And so she was quite influential in her own right, and she wrote a number of books, and she again became she's considered one of the founders of this resurgence in esoteric information and resurgence in this mystery tradition, so-called, as it's finding its way back to modern society for our day and age and for our use and our expression. There's also a much more emphasis in this day and age on so-called nature magic and ideas of Wicca and green magic, so-called nature magic. That's regaining popularity, especially in Britain, that we see a big-time resurgence coming around, and that this emphasis of the woman as a goddess was being considered more so and more so. And this is quite prevalent even in this day and age, that currently we find not only in Britain but here in the States a lot of women that are trying to emphasize this energy and to, again, bring back some balance, bring back a shift to something more in line with nature and in line with the divine. And even with these nature magic proponents and adherents, there's one group that meets every year outside of the Bohemian Grove in Northern California in order to perform a ceremony that is counter to the rituals and ceremonies going on within the grove, keeping in mind that there's a ceremony that takes place every year in the Bohemian Grove that is Druidic in its rites and its origins, and that it also gets back to ideas of aggressive tendency, sacrifice, and again, just a male-dominated mentality. And so these nature magic and Wiccan proponents, and there are men that join with them as well, meet outside of the Bohemian Grove in order to have a counter ritual to the ritual going on inside. And so that is kind of a small example of what I think will continue to manifest itself and express itself, in that you will see women in these key positions that will be able to anchor this energy and bring it into manifestation for our use. Even with the recent tsunami that took place, that is that's Mother Nature in effect on a very vast scale. I've heard some little innuendo allegation from certain corners that perhaps that was some kind of a scalar weapon or some kind of a man-made occurrence. I myself don't intuitively feel that to be the case. I tend to think it was a natural event, and that, again, it's just Mother Nature, if you will, or the consciousness of the globe. Not that the consciousness of the globe is feminine or masculine per se. It's again, androgynous. When we reach levels above and outside of the human condition, then we're in a position where, or the condition, I should say, the quality that's inherent in that condition is both feminine and masculine. So there isn't a real differentiation. There isn't you can't say that the consciousness would be, again, male or female specifically. It's both qualities are engendered in that consciousness, and so that's something to consider as well. So again, this idea that women are playing this role that is going to continue to move forward and allow for a complete change in consciousness. And as far as the men of the planet being cognizant of this and finding within themselves, striking some sort of a balance within themselves as well, so that they can proceed with much more faculty, and there can be much more cooperation. The idea, again, of the Aquarian impulse is tied to synthesis. And as we can cooperate and move together and synthesize our efforts, then this will be putting the best foot forward for all humanity. And again, this male aggression and these warlike tendencies that we have been expressing for quite some time can be relegated to their proper place, and a new cycle can unfold. Again, conditioned by this Aquarian age, and the idea of flowing and cooperation and synthesis can be more predominant in the minds of men. And so that's, again, I think I definitely see that playing out much more in the future. So I am going to go ahead and take a call and see what's going on this afternoon. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hi, how are you?
Corey?
Yeah.
This is Alonzo. How are you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
I hope this isn't straying too much, but I think it's the Mayan calendar that says there's supposed to be a new beginning in the date, like 122112.
2112 is actually the transition point of the Mayan calendar.
December 21st of 12. Okay, now to go to Johann Kepler, I've researched this, and I hope it's accurate, I don't know, but he says that he researched what was the configuration in the sky 2,000 years ago, what all the hoopla was about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so he researched it, and as best as he could find out, this unusual arrangement did happen, and I can't remember the specifics of it, but it happened in what we would now call 7 B.C. So if that was 7 B.C., this is truly 2012 now.
Okay, that's an interesting point.
Off by 7 years.
That is an interesting consideration. Again, the Mayan, I myself, and most people that consider the Mayan, which I do follow the Mayan much more so than I do the Gregorian calendar, as far as the energies that are engendered and ingrained in it, but that 2012, December 21st, 2012, it's not as if that's going to all of a sudden that day is going to pass and then there'll be this instant transition period. There's going to be gradual transition that's in process right now that's leading up to that point and will continue past that point. And so I think any time within now towards the next several years will be prime and adequate time to consider transition. And again, this Aquarian so-called mentality that the keynotes of it are synthesis and cooperation. And so I really feel that, yes, that is going to be much more emphasized, and those that can be more cognizant of these energies and these cycles and these transition points can help humanity to be kind of guides, in a sense, to help humanity to move forward through transition with as little pain as possible. There's the form nature is transitory. There's no reason to get hung up on the physical vehicle because it's a temporary thing, and the energy, the life force within is what's, that's the real key component to consider. Just like within the tsunami recently, much loss of life took place, but nonetheless, the actual life, still maintains itself. The form was lost, but the life maintains itself, and that I again think that emphasis will have to be more considered. I would hope it would be more considered to allow for us to consider things in a more proper fashion, in a more transition type fashion. Is there anything else you care to add? Hello? Okay. Well, thank you for that call. I do appreciate that. That's an interesting point that you bring up. And certainly there have been many, proponents of astronomy that have been of a more spiritual inclination, that have sought to consider what it was that the ancients considered when they looked up at the sky, and why they named the different zodiacal signs the names that they did, and why that's played out the way that it did. And certainly Kepler, Copernicus, Galileo, those are just three examples of individuals that did seek to delve in a bit further and try to ascertain not only the astronomical, the scientific, but the astrological and that scientific component as well. So again, thanks for that call. I do appreciate it. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hello, caller. Line 1. Hello? Okay. Well, at any rate, let's see here. So again, the idea that the mystery tradition, and again, when I speak about mystery tradition, nature has secrets, and not everything that takes place on this planet is known to science. Certainly, there are mysteries behind electricity, and those tie into the procreation and the creative process as well. That there are mysteries that are intimately tied in and bound within nature that man can ascertain and apprehend and draw out, and we can gain some understanding from looking in. When we look into to some of these energies, and to consider again why certain groups set themselves apart to make a strict study of these different inner workings of nature, and they didn't seek to control nature so much as they sought to understand nature and to co-create within a natural process. And this is, again, part of this component that I see I feel that's going to be revisiting humanity, in that we will seek to have a more simpler approach, much more balanced approach to the way in which we consider all areas of human endeavor. The cycles in which aggressive tendencies are culminating, I feel, is rapidly passing away. And the fact that we see so much aggressive workings out on the planet right now is not a real good indicator. Well, actually, the amount of the prevalence and the amount of the aggressive tendencies that can be pointed to and cataloged in our current day and age, to me, is just another way, or it reinforces the idea that when there's an issue, it has to come to the surface to be seen, recognized, and dealt with. And certainly, we can, without much difficulty, see how much aggression is being still expended upon our humanity. And so we're constantly fighting with each other still. I feel like this is rapidly passing in many respects, and that we can start working towards some ideas of goodwill and right human relations as man becomes more and more appalled by man's humanity against other men. Obviously, when I say man, I mean our human condition. And so I think this is, again, I am certainly appalled by all the aggressive tendencies, and I think a lot more people are taking note, and they're considering how they can be constructive in, again, some form of cooperation, how they can move away from taking and consider giving, and have a more nurturing attitude. The female, certainly the mother aspect, and the idea of being nurturing, and the mother raising her young, and things of that nature tie in. And so that's worthy of consideration as well. And I think that's going to be much more emphasized in the future. And hopefully we can all tap into that and take advantage of that. So I do want to go ahead and wrap up here with less than a minute left. I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I want to remind folks to check out Jeff Contreras, Therefore I Am, every Tuesday, 10 p.m., Channel 16. If you guys want to hang out an hour and wait until 10 p.m., you can view The Beautiful Losers, which is on tonight, Channel 16, David Castillo and crew. Let's see, and I guess it's about it. Also, the Metaphysical Philosophical is the 19th. I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to view, and we'll see you folks next Thursday, 8 p.m., Channel 11. Thank you.